So be it, Jedi.
What's going on, guys? Back in another video, another episode of Read It or Skip It. Today's book in particular is Ahsoka by E.K. Johnston. This is an older book. I'm kind of late to the party. I think this was written in 2016. So this book came out before even they had decided they were going to release season 7 of the Clone Wars. So to get things started, this is a very small book. And I know it may not seem like that because it is pretty decent sized, but it's only about 350 pages and all of the text is double spaced and only takes up about 3/4 of the entire page. So I blew through this in like a week. I've kind of been on like a really decent reading spree, but I blew through this pretty quickly. My overall thoughts, I put it off for a long time. For what reason, I don't know. Just because I've sort of created this mentality that Star Wars canon books under Disney's IP aren't as good as Expanded Universe Legends books, which isn't always true. I've read plenty of terrible EU books. So, can't always judge a book by its cover, no pun intended. I put this off just because I was reading trilogies and things that had made more sense to read in order and here and there. But I got around to it, and my overall thoughts are I enjoyed it, but I read this right after I read Shatterpoint, and if you haven't, check out my review of that book. That is a great book, very underrated. So I read this right after I finished Shatterpoint, and this wasn't as good. That may be controversial. I know people a lot of worship this book, but pretty much if you've watched Tales of the Jedi, the animated show on Disney Plus, which forever praising the Lucasfilm animation team behind the Clone Wars, behind Tales of the Jedi, behind the Bad Batch, that is arguably some of the best Star Wars, period. So just a little side note, if you're apprehensive about watching the animated shows, please do, because they are great. Anyway, if you've seen Tales of the Jedi and the episode in which we see Ahsoka and spoilers, if you know what I'm talking about, you understand. If you've seen that and those episodes, this is pretty much that in a book. This book is very local and centralized. It's a small story. There isn't a lot of complexity going on. It pretty much plot point, bing, 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 pretty consistent. It goes from A to B. It's a very simplistic book. I felt as though this book was written for like a 12-year-old. There just isn't a whole lot of emotional nuance and complexity to it. As you know, I just got off Shatterpoint, and Matthew Stover kills that book. I mean, that ups Mace Windu in my like character tier like 10 notches. Like he is a badass in that book, because you go into so much of his inner thoughts, his feelings, the way he looks at the Force, the dark side, the Jedi, the war, everything. And this is kind of like meh. My best parts, as you can see here, there are these blue pages, and those are flashbacks, or yeah, pretty much. So they're flashbacks of the Clone Wars and things that have happened in between the last time we saw Ahsoka and what we're currently seeing her as we're reading. So I mentioned earlier this book was written before Clone Wars Season 7 came out. So to be honest, he must have been working in conjunction with Disney and vice versa, because it's pretty much very consistent. I mean, there are a couple of things that are different, but like the story is the same. So they must have known what story they were going to tell, or maybe he told the story and they took this and went with it on their end. But the story is pretty concise in terms of what they try to elaborate on as to what happened at the end of the Clone Wars. Maul, Siege of Mandalore, etc. So I really enjoyed those parts more than I enjoyed the rest of the book. As I mentioned earlier, it's pretty much the Tales of the Jedi story, but just expanded upon more. So for me to go into detail about what happened is kind of redundant, because you could just watch that and get the gist. This is obviously Ahsoka post Order 66, and she's trying to just make her way in the galaxy. She ends up getting involved with these people, and due to her moral compass, goes out of her way to save them from the Empire and what's going on with them and their planet. I would say overall this book probably would have been better had I not watched Tales of the Jedi before reading it. So if I read it, when it came out 8 years ago, it probably would have been a decent book. And that's not to say I didn't enjoy it, but my overall opinion is, should you read it if you haven't read it, or should you skip it? I would say if you've seen Tales of the Jedi, you're really not going to get much more extra out of this book. But if you haven't, it would be good to read this. Like I said, you would probably enjoy this more had you not seen Tales of the Jedi. But like I said, overall, it's a good book. And if you're a crazy, diehard Ahsoka fan, by all means, read it, because it's not bad. I just didn't enjoy it as much as some of you may. Pretty much that's it, guys. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, check out more videos. We'll see you in the next one.